While Nick Diaz was one of UFC's biggest stars during his prime, he never actually won gold. Instead, he won fans over with his trash talk and hands down, in-your-face fighting style.
Where I come from, people like that get slapped.
So how did Stockton's favorite fighter create a major name for himself in the sport despite losing so many times? Born and raised in Stockton, California, Diaz was no stranger to getting in fights. Eventually, he decided to channel this built-up aggression into mixed martial arts, where he made his debut for the IFC Warriors Challenge Series. After a brief stint in the circuit, Diaz lost to his opponent Jeremy Jackson in the California Regionals.
Fast. Nick is... Yes.
Nick is out.
Yep.
Jeremy the Scorpion Jackson!
Wow. Jeremy Jackson wins the King of the Mountain with 3 knockouts.
After coming off his first defeat, Diaz strung together 3 straight victories before making a jump in competition to Shuto. On December 14th, 2002, in a controversial fight, he lost a split decision to Kuniyoshi. Diaz didn't let 2 losses in his first 7 fights deter his career path. After being defeated by Hironaka, Nick got revenge on Jeremy Jackson.
Hey, thanks for giving me a shot. I really hold on. You know what I mean? You didn't have to do it, bro. You did it, and I appreciate it.
He finished Jeremy Jackson 2 times in a row, which positioned him perfectly for a matchup against Karo Parisyan at UFC 44. Diaz finished Robbie Lawler by punches in the second round just before this bout, and his reputation as an elite boxer and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grappler was building. There was some animosity with his next opponent, Karo Parisyan, because his brother Nate had issues with him in the Ultimate Fighter house.
The thing with Karo is, when he's here, the way he acts towards people, he's not very respectful, you know?
You're a maniac, man. Leave that Spanish. Spanish to the Mexicans.
I'm just kind of hanging out, and he comes up to me, and he's like, oh, and he gets this little grip on my shoulder, he's talking down on me.
In what's considered one of the best fights in UFC history, Parisyan won a narrow split decision against Nick Diaz, which ironically boosted Diaz's star power. Diaz snowballed the momentum of this bout into a 3-fight win streak. He was finding more stability in his UFC career, and his back-and-forth fights ensured he would always have a roster spot. His style made for the perfect matchup against upcoming contender Diego Sanchez, who knew a thing or two about putting on exciting fights. Prime Diego Sanchez also had a wild and crazy personality, leading to unpredictable out-of-ring and inside-the-ring behavior. There was a lot of tension building up between Sanchez and Diaz leading up to the fight as well, which made the finale more intriguing.
Me and Nick Diaz hated each other, man. I'll tell you the inside on that, and then I gotta go. Nick Diaz used to send me emails, man. He found my email. He talked to one of the MMA journalists at the time. There wasn't many. He gave him my email, and he was emailing me hate mails, bad shit, man. Talking shit about my mom.
They matched up in the Ultimate Fighter 2 finale, where despite there being a lot of cool grappling exchanges, Diaz was out-wrestled and lost a unanimous decision. Unfortunately, the loss against Sanchez was the beginning of the worst losing streak of Diaz's career. Despite having an elite grappling skill set, top-heavy wrestlers continued to present problems for his style. Diaz had problems keeping the fight on the feet as well, because of his less-than-stellar takedown defense. On February 4th, 2006, Diaz fought Joe Riggs on the Chuck Liddell vs. Randy Couture 3 undercard. Riggs and Diaz had several confrontations leading up to the bout that made this saga one of the biggest in UFC history. Diaz began to turn heel and take on a bully persona that rubbed other fighters on the roster the wrong way.
He came to the hospital, and I'm on a gurney. I'll admit that. Because
so a gurney.
Yeah, I was laying down. I was getting IV fluids because I cut a lot of weight, and then he comes in with his brother, and he's like, "Look at you! You can't even get up, you see." And and it started from there. Yeah, he was heated.
And then you got heated.
Yeah, because he wouldn't shut the up. I was surprised that I never thought he was gonna crack me.
Riggs put an end to the beef by winning a unanimous decision victory over Diaz. In what felt like a never-ending downward spiral, Diaz had to face another strong contender in the muscled-up Sean Sherk. Sherk was extremely short but was built like a bodybuilding Olympian, which raised questions about the legitimacy of his career. The UFC drug testing programs weren't nearly as extensive as those of this era, which meant fighters in many cases could get away with using performance-enhancing drugs. Shirk was one UFC fighter in particular that the fans were unsure if he was fighting clean or with a competitive advantage.
As far as body types, if you put 10 pounds on over the course of 3 months and you're a full-grown man and you're not in any type of growth spurt, like I said, I'm not going to point fingers. I know people point fingers at me and I hate it. Do the research, know the facts before you accuse somebody of something. I'm not going to point fingers at somebody else because of the way they look.
Shirk winning fights largely depended on his decision to grapple or try to stand with opponents. He ultimately ended up defeating Diaz by unanimous decision, resulting in a 3-loss losing streak for the pride of Stockton, California. Diaz was able to overcome this losing streak to win 4 straight fights. He briefly left the UFC to fight in the upcoming promotion Elite XC, but lost by doctor stoppage in the first round to KJ Noons. The controversial ending to the bout sparked a lifelong rivalry between the fighters and teams, resulting in a brawl and beef.
Your son just had a great win in the ring here, and maybe unfortunately outshined by what happened afterwards. Nick Diaz was brought to the ring to talk about a rematch and kind of broke loose. Tell us what happened in your words.
When KJ was giving respect to me and my wife, and we were just enjoying the moment. I heard Nick in the left-hand corner, trying to push into the interview and try to diss.
The loss to KJ Noons produced the best version of Diaz up to that point in his career. He won a personal record-setting 11 straight fights, which provided a resurgence. Some of those victories included getting revenge in a win over KJ Noons in the rematch, defeating BJ Penn, and an upcoming power puncher from the UK.
That's great. But you got to go back to Paul Daly versus Nick Diaz. You want to see a wild fight? Nick Diaz was the f***ing man.
Despite multiple brawls and altercations outside of the ring, it was the sportsmanship he extended to fighters after his fights that made him even more of a fan favorite. He built an anywhere, anytime reputation, but showed enough humility and victory to make him admirable.
Well done, dude. Good fight, man. No worries, man. You're a good champion, man. I appreciate it. You're a fucking champion.
The winning streak set him up for a match against the dangerous Carlos Condit. Condit didn't rely on wrestling to secure wins, so the matchup made sense for Diaz stylistically. He still came up short, losing a unanimous decision. Somehow, after losing the bout, Diaz took on the biggest challenge of his fighting career against Georges St. Pierre. Considered by many to be the greatest of all time, the consensus was Diaz would get out-grappled to a decision loss. GSP was on a 10-fight win streak and a top pound-for-pound fighter. For the most part, he seemed invincible. Despite his dominance, GSP was known for playing fights safe and refusing to have meaningful exchanges with his opponents on the feet.
Secondly, George's game, because his takedowns are so strong, is almost always done from top position on the ground. It's rare for George to be in bottom position on the ground. And in a fight situation, if you're already on top of someone and you've got the striking prowess of Georges St. Pierre, I was happy to coach him more in what we call grapple boxing, the skill of grappling to punching on the ground. It just made more sense for him.
Everyone knew the route to victory for GSP, but few had the wrestling tools to stop him. However, there was a small section of the UFC community who thought Diaz could break GSP mentally with his trash talk and mind games leading into the fight.
Stylistically, I have to give the advantage to GSP. Just because he's faster, he's more explosive, his wrestling is crazy good. But Diaz, he's just one of those guys, man. He's tough as nails. You can't knock the guy out with a baseball bat. You can't hurt him. The more you punch him, the more excited he gets, So I think it's going to make for a pretty interesting fight.
GSP tapping to strikes from Matt Serra was still in the back of UFC fans' minds, and someone as mentally strong as Diaz could use that to his advantage. The defeat to Serra was in the distant past, But losses can haunt fighters when they find themselves in adversity during a tough fight.
During the circuit training, even if the sparring, 25 times, that's his fucking head, dude. So I'm throwing the fucking thing. I'm throwing the fucking thing. So fucking Longo really made me believe that I could fucking stand with this guy. He goes, they think you're gonna try to get him down.
Even though Diaz had wrestling shortcomings, he was still a BJJ black belt who could offer a threat on his back and throw up a multitude of submissions. It made sense that this fight could potentially stay on the feet, where Diaz had a chance to outshine GSP in striking exchanges with his front-footed style and rock-solid chin. To add on to all of this, GSP didn't have one-punch knockout power, so the matchup was actually closer than the Vegas odds may have reflected. Unfortunately for Nick, GSP beat Diaz in a unanimous decision, which resulted in Diaz taking a 2-year hiatus before returning to the octagon. None of Nick Diaz's prior defeats were as heartbreaking as his most recent loss. Every fan wants to see their UFC heroes go out on top, but that is rarely the case. Fighters simply have a bad habit of not knowing when to call it quits.
My producer just asked me, does a promoter have the right to tell an athlete when he's done?
He was matched up against another aging fighter in Robbie Lawler, and some fans thought Diaz stood a chance in anticipation of a mainly stand-up bout. At this point, both fighters' reflexes and durability had faded, but they still had the potential to put on a 10 out of 10 crowd pleaser. The fight was a rematch of their bout when both fighters were younger and in their prime. It seemed fair that they would compete against each other, with retirement on the horizon for each of them in an evenly contested matchup. It didn't help that Diaz had some undisclosed issues leading into the fight with Lawler.
I guess the question is like, why fight through something like that when it's that bad? Why even fight Robbie Lawler?
It was kind of it was a tough situation. Nick hadn't fought in years, and there was just a lot of weird stuff going on in his life.
Those fans were wrong, and Father Time caught up with Diaz. Diaz didn't have any success in striking exchanges and seemed like a shell of himself. To the disappointment of the mixed martial arts world, Diaz appeared to quit due to exhaustion and the damage he took. Nick Diaz in his prime was one of the most exciting fighters in and out of the ring, but an up-and-down career was cemented with a devastating loss to Robbie Lawler. And to watch the career breakdown of another legend, check out this video on the losses of Anthony Pettis.